Good morning, and thank you for joining us. During today's live stream event, we will be giving you an overview of Elia Group's half-year results. And for this, we are joined by the Group CFO Katrien van der Borre and the Group CEO Chris Peters. Welcome to you both. What will we be examining this morning? We will first look back at some of the group's notable successes from the past 6 months. Chris Peters will join me to talk about the current geopolitical context and explore how Elia Group can contribute to the establishment of a more independent, resilient and climate-neutral energy system. Catherine van der Borde will then take us through the financials, and finally she will present the group's outlook for the rest of the year. Before we start, we must share a disclaimer with you, as mentioned in the slide on screen now. You must read this before we can continue, and I suggest to continue this presentation as the slides and the script will be made available online later today. And with that, we can move on to some highlights from the first half of 2022. Let's start off with a short video of a recent Euronext Brussels moment. At the end of June, Elia Group took part in the bell-ringing ceremony following its successful rights offering of 590 million euros.
3, 2, 1...
This 590 million euros from the rights offering is the biggest amount that Elia Group has ever raised since its IPO, which was already 17 years ago. The transaction took place in the middle of turbulent geopolitical events and difficult financial markets, but nevertheless, 100% of the new Elia Group shares were subscribed. Chris, without becoming too overconfident, we can say it was a success, isn't it?
Yes, indeed. So it was a very successful capital raise, and that was nice then to have, of course, the bell ringing ceremony to celebrate that. We already felt during the roadshow that we were very well received and people liked the activities that we discussed with them, and as well that the investment story that we have was a very attractive investment story and that we had a good track record in delivering that. Today as well, we've faced the future with confidence. We have many challenges in our sector, as you know, but we have a good track record and a very capable team to deliver on them.
Indeed, a robust growth story. Only 3 years ago, Elia Group celebrated a successful rights offering of about 430 million euros at 57 euros per share, and the latest offering was at 124.5 euro per share, so that's 2.5 times more than in 2019. Catherine, what does that say about how the group and its share has been evolved in those last 3 years?
Well, I think that the changes in our share price reflect a healthy mix of resilience and growth. And so in addition to our existing infrastructure, we are operating in a segment where investment opportunities will continue to present themselves. Combined with our strategic vision, I think we can say this appeals to investors, Marlene.
Yeah. Now, what about the shareholder mix? Has this much evolved since this last transaction?
Not really. When the subscription period came to an end, almost 89% of the new Elia Group shares had been subscribed. This reflects the trust that both our core reference shareholders and existing investors have placed in us. The remaining 11% of rights we offered through a private placement to institutional investors. The offer was oversubscribed 6.3 times. We see the successful capital increase as a reflection of the great appreciation that investors have for our work, but at the same time, we recognize the responsibility we have to maintain a high level of performance for everyone who has invested in the company.
Mm-hmm. Talking about performance, let us dive into some numbers, Catherine. Without going too much into detail yet, what results from the first 6 months of the year can you share with us?
Let me start by saying that ETB and 50Hertz have invested so far 623.6 million, with a focus on projects that are aimed at strengthening the backbone in both the Belgian and German grids and integrating increasing amounts of renewable energy into the system. And Chris will walk you through the key CapEx projects later. In terms of financial results, Elia Group achieved strong results across all 3 segments, leading to an increase in the adjusted net profit of 24% to 186.7 million compared to the first half of 2021. This also translated into an increase of the earnings per share up to 2.29 euros per share, and this based on the weighted average number of shares outstanding. This being the result of the strong performance across the segment and a higher remuneration in Belgium following the capital increase. In addition, with a reliability level of 99.999%, we provide society with a robust power grid that is so important for social economic prosperity, so making us one of the most reliable grids in Europe, and this in very turbulent times.
Thank you, Catherine. Before we dig deeper into the group's financial results, let's talk a moment to discuss the context in which Elia Group has carried out its activities over the past few months. The first half of 2022 involved record-breaking energy prices and the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Both at European and member state levels, policy changes have occurred to make the energy system more independent, resilient, and climate neutral. Chris, what has been the impact of this on Elia Group?
Well, let me give you 2 examples, Marlene. First of all, if you look at Germany, the German government issued in April the Easter package. This was a number of legislative measures that were aimed at, of course, decreasing the dependence on Russian gas, but on top of that, of course, to as well accelerate the energy transition. If you look at the targets that they've put now, say they want to have 80% of renewable energy coverage by 2030, coming from 42% now, and they want to go to 100% coverage by 2035. And meanwhile, of course, they want as well an acceleration at the level of electrification, meaning more EVs, more heat pumps, more industrial electrification to come. And if you look at the European level, 1 month later, Europe issued its Repower Europe report. And in that Repower Europe report, we as well see again an acceleration of the energy transition that is needed in the context of the independence Europe wants to have from Russian gas.
Okay, so what's the impact on Elia Group?
Well,
More
of course,
pressure?
there will be more pressure on us, but as you know, we are used to have this kind of pressures, and so our teams have worked over the last months on 2 dimensions. First of all, of course, we supported our governments as a trusted advisor on the short-term issues that we have at hand. Some of those short-term issues are, of course, how do we overcome the challenges of the upcoming winter, and so there our teams worked on market measures that we could do, like the capacity remuneration mechanism that we have in Belgium, but also other short-term measures that we could take. And of course we worked as well on what does it take to have those long-term, more structural measures implemented, what does it mean in terms of accelerating permits, etc. So our teams worked very hard, but I think that we delivered nice results on that.
A clear signal to accelerate the development of offshore wind was also given during the North Sea Summit in May, which was held in Denmark. Let's take a look at a short video clip from the European Commission.
Thank you very much, Mette. Thank you very much for convening this important meeting. And therefore, I'm very happy to be here today to witness the action you are taking here as 4 countries with the memorandum you've signed, which indeed is a very strong political commitment from your countries to making the North Sea Europe's green power plan.
The North Sea Summit brought together, as we just saw, the heads of state and energy ministers from Belgium, Germany, the Netherlands and Denmark. And as we can see on the picture now, Chris, on the right, you took part in this remarkable event. How can Elia Group contribute to make the ambitions of this North Sea Summit a reality?
Well, Marlene, it was not only an interesting event, it actually was very symbolic. It was on the same day that Europe issued its Repower Europe document. So that was quite interesting that we had both elements at the same time. Both were pleading for an acceleration. Of course, when you have acceleration, you need to adjust the grid, not only to have more renewable energy coming from offshore wind that will be connected from the North Sea to the countries that we just discussed, but also to have more interconnectors, because what we see is that there is a difference between the level of renewable energy that you can integrate in between the different markets, and therefore more interconnectors will create a more integrated market that will ensure that every country will have access to sufficient renewables. Second thing, of course, important is as well that we see that between the ambition level that Europe has set and the reality that we see on the ground in terms of permitting or in terms of incentives or investment stability that we see for the different participants to this, there is still a mismatch. And for that, Elia Group has issued a white paper that discusses how we can actually tackle those problems. This document was presented at the Wind Europe conference in Bilbao and is still under discussion today at European level between the different actors.
In recent years, Elia Group has built up a strong reputation for publishing reports and white papers on relevant societal topics concerning the energy sector. In November this year, we are due to publish yet another of these studies about the electrification of industry. Its title will be Powering Industry Towards Net Zero, and by way of a preview of this publication, Elia organized a partner event in April that was dedicated to the decade of electrification. The decarbonization of society is bringing about drastic changes, especially in the industry. Chris, why did the group choose to focus on the electrification of the industry? And here you see some images of this partner event in April.
Well, of course, industry is very relevant in terms of making the transition happen. As we have seen as a consequence of, for instance, the Fit for 55, many companies started to work on their plans to accelerate their transition towards a net zero company. And of course, the events that we have seen lately with the impact on the energy markets, more specifically on the gas market, have as well shown for many companies that investing early pays off. Those companies that are most progressed in terms of the transition, meaning having heavily already electrified some of their processes, have access to PPAs, have access to renewable energy, were of course less touched by the high gas prices over the last period, and therefore there's a big incentive these days for companies to work on that. The contribution of Elia Group, of course, is that we want to make sure that that can be in a smooth way and integrating them in a correct way into the electricity grid. And of course, the relationship between us and those companies will change because there will be more volatility, more variability on the grid that needs to be managed, and therefore we see them as partners to manage together the energy transition going forward.
The new Elia Group study on powering industry towards net zero will be launched on Friday, 18th of November, during a live-streamed event. In recent months, as well as bringing representatives from industry together, we also organized our very first Elia Group Offshore Innovation Day in Ostend, and that brings us back to the sea. Chris, what added value can innovation bring to our offshore activities?
Well, actually, today you see that there is a very positive dynamic into the offshore sector. Not only there is a high ambition to develop the sector, but as well we see that in terms of technology innovation, a lot is happening into the sector. And so there are many opportunities both for Elia, but also for the other sector players to further improve the effectiveness and the efficiency of the activities that we have at sea. And the commitment that we have as Elia Group by bringing together the whole sector is that we exchange with each other, because of course collaboration is beneficial for everybody. Many times we have to go in difficult circumstances out at sea, and doing this together with the right technology is of course something that will be helpful for every actor in the offshore sector.
You have innovation, collaboration. These are also the drivers of Elia Group's Open Innovation Challenge, our annual competition that is aimed at fostering collaboration with startups. The ultimate aim of this is to strengthen a culture of innovation across our company, and the central theme of this year's challenge was sustainability. In June, CenturySense from Poland was chosen as this year's winner, and its winning product was a sensor that monitors the operational state of overhead lines using digital analysis. Catherine, as sustainability lies within your responsibilities, you were also the sponsor of this event. Were you happy with the winner?
Oh yes, absolutely. And we chose the CenturySense because its technology can be quickly deployed and it's easy to scale up. The constant monitoring of overhead lines and use of data analysis extends the lifespan. In fact, the Open Innovation Challenge is one of the many initiatives that Elia Group organized this year with our Act Now program in mind.
And talking about Act Now, we would like to invite you for another live-streamed event on the 5th of October, during which we will provide an update about our sustainability objectives. It is important to mention now that we have decided to add 2 new Sustainable Development Goals to our Act Now program. SDG 9 on industry, innovation and infrastructure, and SDG 14 on life below water, Catherine, what's the rationale behind this decision?
Well, the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations act as a reference framework for us, helping to positively contribute to the global development goals. Since our industry is evolving so rapidly, we are constantly looking at how we can adapt our ACNO program to the new reality. And both innovation and resilient infrastructure are key for a robust energy future. Chris already explained how we would like to support the electrification of the industry, and therefore it seemed logical to add an SDG which was related to those topics to ACNO. We approached the life below water SDG to ACNO for the same reason. We want to explicitly take our impact on and positive contributions to offshore development into account.
Yeah. Can you give one concrete example of how our offshore activities can contribute positively to life below water?
Yes, sure. We are currently working on the development of an artificial energy island in the North Sea, approximately 45 kilometers off the Belgian coast. As we design and construct the energy island, we will adopt various measures to minimize the impact of our activities on the marine ecosystem. In fact, we will go further than just mitigating any negative effects. We have adopted an approach called nature inclusive design. Along with a group of experts, we are working on a smart design for this island, which will have positive effect on the local environment. And as you mentioned, Marlene, more details will be shared during our sustainability event in October.
Yeah. Now, our sustainable approach to the island's design is clear. Chris, what is the relevance of the island in the light of the energy transition?
Well, yeah. So the energy island is very relevant if you look at the further evolution of the energy transition. It will be the first artificial energy hub in the North Sea. Actually, it will be the first artificial energy hub so far in the world. And what it will do is not only to bring to shore 3.5 gigawatt additional offshore wind that is in the Princess Elizabeth Zone. On top of that, it will have 2 HVDC interconnectors coming to the island and then come from there to the Belgian shore. So we will have the Nautilus interconnector and the Triton interconnector that will arrive on the island, and therefore not only bring renewables from the Princess Elizabeth Zone, but also create the opportunity to trade renewable energy with Denmark and with the UK. And over time, probably we can add additional interconnectors to this hub. This is therefore a key project for the further development of the North Sea, as we see that these kind of projects will be needed to further in an efficient way develop the North Sea. And so by 2024, we will start the construction of this island. It will have to be delivered by mid-year of 26 in terms of the physical island. That will be built based on a caisson structure in which we then inject sand, and on top of that becomes a good stable environment where we can build the AC fields that we have, but also the DC connections that we will have on this island.
Yeah, I also see a small port and a helicopter deck. The island is still under development, but let's have a look at some key projects currently under construction. So we have a lot of projects under construction. What are the most important ones to mention, Chris?
Well, if we look at Belgium, I would like to mention the Mercator Breugel project. So that is already part of the backbone today. We are more or less doubling the capacity on this line, which is from close to Antwerp to close to Brussels in Dilbeek. That will land, so we will double the capacity of transition. And so by reinforcing the backbone in Belgium, we create a robust grid that is also resilient and then can accept this further development of renewable energy and interconnection with other countries. If you look at Germany, the Ostwind 2 project is well underway. So in the Ostwind 2 project in June, we installed the top side of the Arcadis Ost platform, which is the first platform that we have in this Ostwind 2 project. It has overall 2 platforms. The other one is the Baltic Eagle platform. It's still under construction today in Hoboken, and it will sail out probably after summer, and then we will install it as well. And maybe very recently we also installed already, meanwhile, the cable that is connecting the Baltic
the Arcadis Ost.
The Arcadis Ost platform to shore. So we're ready now to electrify at the moment that the wind turbines will be installed in that region.
About the Arcadis Oost 1 project, in mid-April, Elia Group organized a press trip to the construction site of the platform. At that point, it was still under construction at a shipyard in Denmark. The press trip was attended by the Belgian Deputy Prime Minister Pierre-Yves Dermagne.
Wel, voor ons is het een heel belangrijk project. Het is een van de projecten in de uitbreiding op zee die Duitsland momenteel aan het maken is. We hebben ondertussen al 1 gigawatt aangesloten over de laatste jaren in de Baltische Zee. Dit is het volgende project, komt een kleine 250 megawatt bij. Komt daarnaast nog een platform met Iberdrola waar nog eens een keer 500 megawatt bij gaat komen. En we gaan tot 6 gigawatt gaan tegen het jaar 2030 in de Baltische Zee en ook een stukje in de Duitse Noordzee.
Offshore-Windenergie für die Anrainerstaaten an Ost- und Nordsee ist ein zentraler Baustein, um auch unabhängiger von fossilen Energieimporten zu werden. Und die letzten Monate haben gezeigt, wie wichtig das ist. Ich glaube, die Projekte, die 50 Hertz schon realisiert hat, zeigen, dass wir exzellent für Offshore-Windenergie aufgestellt sind. Ich will nicht zuletzt nennen Combined Grid Solution, die wir zusammen mit den Kollegen aus Energienet realisiert haben. Also wir haben die Kompetenz, wir haben die Expertise und freuen uns auf weitere Projekte.
On voit que le coût des énergies renouvelables est de moins en moins élevé, même si les projets tels que ceux-ci sont des projets importants qui nécessitent des capitaux conséquents. Et je pense effectivement qu'à l'avenir, le soutien devra encore être présent, mais sans doute de manière moins importante. Le rôle de l'État et des pouvoirs publics, c'était surtout de pouvoir initier la démarche, comme on l'a fait en Belgique, de manière précurseur et pionnière en 2004, avec la décision du gouvernement fédéral de lancer un premier parc éolien. Et on voit aujourd'hui que ça porte ses fruits, puisque ça a permis à des entreprises belges d'acquérir du savoir-faire, de l'expertise qui maintenant peut s'exporter à travers le monde.
And to end our section on the highlights, one last topic remains. The Belgian regulator just approved a new tariff methodology for Belgium that will start in 2024 and will run for 4 years until 2027. Catherine, we can see that the Belgian regulator, CREG, has opted for stability. Can you walk us a bit through the key parameters?
Yeah, for sure. So, like you were saying, Marlene, I think it's fair to say that it remains broadly in line with the current methodology. So first, it will remain a cost-plus model with coverage of all reasonable costs, including of fair remuneration and incentives. Second, there is no risk on volume, and also the embedded debt principle remains applicable, meaning that all the cost of debt is fully covered by the tariff. So the rising interest rates we are observing today have no direct impact on the profitability of ETB. And finally, in terms of funding of the company, the regulatory gearing also remains unchanged, meaning we will finance our activities with 40% equity and 60% debt. So what is precisely changing? Well, first, in terms of remuneration, we will have in the future, as from 2024, an equity remuneration that is set at 4.1% compared to the 4.68% today. This means that 40% of the average RAB will be remunerated at 4.1%. Then, similar to MOG 1, we will receive a risk premium for MOG 2. For both projects, this premium leads to an aggregated net contribution of 20 basis points. Also, 2 additional incentives have been defined by the regulator, and its total contribution is estimated at around 1.4% compared to the 1.3% today, as long, of course, as ETB succeeds in reaching a reasonable target of around 65 to 70% for its incentives. This leads to an average net return on equity for the next regulatory period of around 5.7%, that we see as being only a minor reduction compared to the current period.
Catherine, you already provided us with some few key figures. You have much more, of course, so let's have a look at the group figures now.
Yes, thank you, Marlene. And indeed, we posted solid results across all the segments over the first 6 months of the years. First, Elia Group's revenues amount to 1.9 billion, an increase of 48.8%, mainly driven by the increase in revenues in both Belgium and Germany. In Belgium, our revenue was impacted by higher regulated net profit, higher depreciations linked to the growing asset base, one-off tariff compensation for the financial cost linked to the capital increase, and higher cost for ancillary services. The higher ancillary services resulted from the high gas prices caused by the war in Ukraine and the increase of imbalance volume caused by the increase of the renewable share. In Germany, revenues increased mainly driven by the higher energy revenue due to the continuing rise in energy prices. EBIT increased compared to the previous period, totaling 296.3 million. This increase is driven by the following element. For Belgium, it was the result of a higher regulated net profit, higher depreciations linked, like we said, to the growing asset base, and higher financial costs linked to the capital increase, all pass through into revenue in conformity with the Belgian regulatory framework. In Germany, the higher EBIT was mainly a result of higher investment remuneration and lower operational expenditures, as prior year costs were marked by a peak in the maintenance cycle. Also, associates contributed quite strongly to the group's EBIT, up to 24.5 million, mainly driven by Nemolink interconnector. The Elia Group adjusted net profit increased by 24.1%, reaching 186.7 million, with Germany contributing for a little bit less than 50%, ETB a little bit below 40%, and Nemolink had a very strong start with a 12% contribution to the net result. Let us now turn to the net debt of Elia Group. At the end of June, we carried a net debt of around 3.5 billion, a decrease of more than 28% compared to the end of last year. This decrease was mainly driven by two elements. First, the capital increase that took place at the end of June, mentioned earlier, with net proceeds amounting to around 583 million. Second, the strong decrease in net debt at 50Hertz, which is fully attributable to the high EEG cash inflow, which resulted from the very high energy market prices. And as I mentioned at the start of the presentation, Elia Group invested 623.6 million over the first half of the year. These investments were mainly financed by the cash flow from our operating activities. As no new debt has been contracted by Elia Groups, the average cost of debt remained flat at 1.7%, and the credit rating by S&P remained unchanged, with a BBB+ rating and a stable outlook.
Yeah, you mentioned solid results across all the three segments. Can you highlight what have been the key drivers for Belgium, for instance?
Sure, Marlene. And ETB posted strong results over the first half of the year in line with our guidance. I explained earlier why the revenues increased, so let us move straight to the adjusted net profit of 74.2 million, up by almost 20% year over year. The key drivers were the following. First, we have a higher fair remuneration, up by 6 million, driven by both the asset growth and a higher equity following Elia Group's capital increase. Also, the contribution from incentives increased by 0.5 million. This is linked to a better performance of the timely commissioning and interconnection capacity incentives. Furthermore, the result indirectly benefited from the one-off tariff compensation for the financial cost linked to the capital increase, up by 3.4 million. These are accounted through equity under IFRS, but as you may know, these costs are fully passed through to the tariffs under the embedded debt principle in Belgian GAAP. Finally, the result also benefited from regulatory settlement and the reversal of provision for the influenceable incentive following the SALDI 2021 review, up by 2.2 million, while the capitalized borrowing cost increased due to a higher level of assets under construction.
Yeah, we have mentioned the capital increase a few times now. It drives on one hand the results of ETB, but it is also strengthening the financial position of ETB. Katrien, can you comment on this?
Yes, ETB indeed strengthened its balance sheet with around 287 million of equity, representing the net proceeds of the capital increase allocated to the Belgian regulated activities in view of financing or organic growth. Together with the profit reservation, these are the biggest drivers for the strong increase in equity. The company's liquidity position remains robust, and both the sustainable RCF and commercial paper are fully undrawn at the end of June. ETB credit rating by S&P remains unchanged, with a BBB plus and a stable outlook. And finally, ETB has a well-balanced debt maturity profile. It has a weighted debt duration of 5.9 years and no upcoming near-term material maturities. The average cost of debt of the remaining debt is unchanged at 1.9%, as no new debt was contracted in the first half of the year.
Yeah, let's go to Germany. Germany contributed approximately 50% of the group's results. What are the key drivers there, Katrien?
Yes, indeed, Marlene. The adjusted net profit in Germany increased by more than 23% to 98.7 million as a result of first higher investment remuneration following the growth of the asset base, up by more than 19.6 million. Second, higher financial results, up by 10 million, driven by the revaluation of provision for congestion income from interconnectors to be returned to grid customers based on the upward revision of the interest forward curve. Then we had lower onshore OPEX and other costs. We had also other costs up by 1.7 million, mainly following the ramp down from last year's peak of the maintenance cycle and lower digitalization cost, partly offset by the growing workforce driven by the expanding business. These effects were partially offset by the higher depreciation driven by the commissioning of projects. Let's now look at the financial position of 50Hertz. The total equity increased by 202 million to around 2.1 billion. This increase is primarily driven by the higher hedge reserve for future contracts, up by 190 million, which was due to the further increase in energy prices in the first half of the year and resulted in an increase of the fair value of this contract. Note that the 200 million, the portion of the proceeds of the capital increase of Elia Group allocated to Eurogrid GmbH, will take place in the third quarter of 2022, when the statutory capital increase will be effective and therefore is not yet reflected in the equity. In parallel, our partner KfW intends to increase its equity participation on a pro rata basis by contributing 50 million of equity, leading to a total equity injection of 250 million. The liquidity position of 50Hertz remains strong at 4.4 billion, with all revolving and overdraft facilities fully undrawn. Important to note is that out of the 3.5 billion cash position, 3.1 billion is linked to the EG cash position and has to be given back to the consumers. 50Hertz didn't tap into the debt market neither, and given all outstanding debt has a fixed coupon, the average cost of debt remains at 1.4% at the end of 2022. The maturity profile remains balanced with a weighted debt duration of 6.9 years. There has been no change to the rating of Eurogrid, which remains BBB+ with a stable outlook.
Mm-hmm. Besides the regulated activities in Belgium and Germany that we just discussed, Elia Group also operates Nemolink and is developing various non-regulated activities. Catherine, how did this third segment contribute to the results?
The third segment performed quite well, Marlene. Its adjusted net profit came in at 13.9 million. The key drivers were as follows. First, the contribution from Nemolink rose by 7.3 million, leading to a total net contribution of 22.8 million. This contribution was the result of a very strong performance, reflected by operationally high availability, 100% availability of the interconnector, but also important market spreads characterized by many flow reversal between Belgium and the UK. Note that if Nemolink continues to keep up this very high availability and spreads continue on the same trend, we believe we'll reach the cap in the third quarter this year. This would therefore result in a total net contribution to the group for the entire year of around 30 to 35 million. Also, EGI contributed positively to the result due to the recovery of the international consulting business and tight cost control measures. Thirdly, we had higher holding costs driven by ongoing business development activities and the setup of WindGrid in the beginning of the year. And finally, we had a lower contribution from Rialto due to further business development and higher other non-regulated costs.
Okay, and to end today's presentation, let's have a look at the outlook. What can we expect from the next 6 months, Catherine?
Well, we reiterate our outlook and we are guiding for a return on equity towards the lower end of the 6.25 to 7.25% range. This return depends, like you know, on the return on equity of our three segments. So in Belgium, we remain confident about being able to achieve a return on equity of between 5 to 6% while investing around 425 million. In Germany, we aim to achieve a return on equity of between 8 to 10%. And due to the good progress that Chris mentioned of the Ostwind 2 and SüdOstLink, we expect to invest roughly 1 billion instead of the 850 million announced during the first quarter. For the third segment, we expect it to make a contribution of between 10 to 15 million to the group's result. This, of course, will depend on the performance of Nemolink, given its contribution to this segment, but also on the cost linked to the business development activities. And as always, I would like to point out that this guidance doesn't take into account any potential M&A transaction.
Okay, thank you very much, Catherine. Ladies and gentlemen, we have shared a lot of information with you. I suggest we now move on to the Q&A section. Yannick de Koning, our Investor Relation Manager, will guide us through this. Yannick, could you share the first question with us, please?
Thank you, Marlene. I'm very happy to welcome our analyst of KBC, Kepler Cheuvreux, and the Group Petercam. I would propose to start straight away with Olivier van der Waande from KBC. So please, Olivier, give us your questions.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Thank you for taking my questions. My first question would be around the Belgian capex. More specifically, we have the project Ventilus and Boucle du Nord. There are some political discussions going on, and I want to ask your opinion about what would happen in scenario that the cables would be underground instead of overground over the air as you have now. What would be the impact on Elia's global capex plan in Belgium? Not only the project, but maybe other projects would be impacted by such a decision. That would be my first question.
Chris?
Okay, so in case it would become an underground scenario, as you know, important to mention here is that the underground scenario would not fulfill the objectives of the plan that was defined by the former federal government. So we continue to plead for a overhead line solution because that's the only solution that will give a robust grid. So that's quite important to mention that Elia will continue to plead for an overhead line. Obviously, it is a decision of the government where they in the end want to be. In case they would decide to go to an underground, actually would mean that we will have to rework the federal development plan, so that will take some time in terms of restudying the way how that would be done. As you've seen, we've made in the light of the discussion around Ventilus and Boucle du Hainaut, we've made a calculation of the additional capex that would give. So there would be an order of magnitude of around 5 billion additional capex that would be need to be delivered, but of course with a important time delay. We at that moment of time would see that there would be a delay of this project of at least an additional 5 years compared to the current schedule that we have. Current schedule that we still continue to try to hold on, given the discussions that the government had in terms of what dates are they going to take a decision. So if the Flemish government would take a decision in September and still then develop a scoping note and a trajectory definition by the end of the year, would still be in time of the capex plan as you see it today. In case they would decide for undergrounding, we would first of all have to rework the capex plans fully. We estimated this to 5 billion with a 5-year delay that would come in, but of course obviously it would as well have an impact on the island, the artificial island that we plan to build on the sea. That's a quite important project that we have, and that will probably then shift together with the rest of the program, because you cannot connect wind farms without the presence of the Ventilus and Boucle du Hainaut project, and therefore there would be no reason to have the timeline that we have today for the island, and so that one would as well be postponed in time. For the rest of the grid reinforcement, we continue of course the plan that we have, because in any scenario those grid reinforcements will be needed, and so there will not be a drastic impact on the rest of the program that we will continue to execute in that case. There might be, of course, that we will use then the benefit of that situation to bring a couple of those projects forward as we will have less, let's say, needs of outages to plan the Ventilus and the Boucle du Hainaut program, and we would probably use those possibilities of outages to replan a number of other projects that we can put forward a little bit. But I think overall the impact will be higher capex but delayed in time.
Okay, very clear, thank you. My second question would be about the EEG. So I read that the German government had decided to make some changes on who pays and maybe when pays. And I asked myself, what would be the impact in practice on the EEG balance of 50 Hertz? Would it become, for example, less volatile, or how should I see that?
No, I don't think so that volatility will increase based on these measures. So what will be the impact? It will be the impact on an impact on let's say the speed by which the cash excess that we have today linked to the EEG will be given back to the consumers. To put it differently, today we recover the cost of the EEG through two mechanisms. First mechanism is a kind of surcharge on the electricity tariff, and the second mechanism is a tax on CO2, which has been raised by the government last year, and which is given back to the TSOs in order to cover the cost of the EEG mechanism. What the government decided to do is to, let's say, skip one of the two mechanisms. So the surcharge is currently put to 0, and we will keep the recovery of the EEG mechanism through the CO2 tax. So basically, we have today an excess cash linked to the EEG of around 3.1 billion, and the speed by which we will give it back, or the amount of the excess, will reduce, let's say, faster than in case the government would not have taken any measure. Anyhow, this cash is not core cash of the company. We always comment, and you know that on the fact that it has to be considered as cash to be given back to the consumers for your valuation.
Okay, thank you. And then my third and last question for now is about the leverage in Germany. So currently you can put additional leverage on the holding Eurogrid. Would there be any risk going forward that the German regulator forbids you to do that, so that you would lose that advantage, or is that not coming up?
But it's not something that was discussed in the context of the definition of the parameters for the regulatory framework of the next period. So that's something that we do in the current period. In the next period, starting as from 2024 and lasting for 5 years, we know that, let's say, the parameters of the regulatory framework have been set. Some elements have still to be defined, like the efficiency factors, but the parameter linked to the efficiency or the leverage we can benefit from the financing policies we applied at 50 years has not been questioned for this next regulatory period.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Olivier, for those interesting questions. I propose now to give the floor to Viviane Maquet from Petercam de Groof. Viviane, do you have any questions?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you very much for the presentation. First, two questions on my side. Firstly, on Nemolink. So I understand from your comment that you might reach the cap in Q3, leading to a potential contribution for the full year about 35 million. Just wonder if you can give us some comments on next year, because I understand, of course, the cap is based on a roll 3 years. So wonder if you reach a cap this year, how can it affect next year? Is it the risk you will reach the cap more rapidly next year then, or can you give any comment on that front? Thanks.
Yeah, so the regulatory framework of Nemolink is based on a 5-year period rolling cap. So we will, let's say, end the 5-year period next year in 2023. It started in 2019. The cap that we believe to reach at, let's say, the beginning of Q3 is the yearly cap for 2022. For year 2023, we have already sold approximately 3/4, so 75% of the capacity of Nemo Link based on long-term auction. And so we expect the, let's say, result of Nemo Link, the net profit, the contribution of Nemo Link to the third segment to be indeed quite high in 2023, depending, of course, on the availability of the cable. Like you know, there are always two elements to consider. One is price, and second is volume. And of course, the volume will depend on the availability of the cable.
Okay, thanks. And my second question will be, can you remind us on the calendar for the next item to be discussed for the regulatory period in Germany for the next one?
So, if I understand your question correctly, what is still to be discussed with the regulator? It's the base year. So, what is the reference, or what will be the reference for the cost? And second, the efficiency factors, both the individual efficiency factor and the general productivity or efficiency factor. So, those are the three elements that will be discussed with the regulator. For the base year, all the information has been set to the regulator, and we expect discussion to really start at the beginning of next year. And then we expect discussion on the productivity factors. So basically 2023 will be the year where we'll have more or finance release visibility on what we can expect in terms of base year and productivity factors in Germany.
Okay, thank you. That's all from my side.
Thank you, Viviane. Then I would propose we switch to Juan from Kepler Cheuvreux.
Hi, thank you. Thank you and good morning. Thank you for taking our questions. I have two in my view, in my side. I want to double check with you, especially on the guidance front. If we adjust to the capital increase, the new updated guidance that you're seeing on the lower range of the 625 to 725 ratio, return on equity, sorry, that will imply something north of 300 million of net income on the share or attributable to shareholders, right?
In the magnitude, yes.
Okay, perfect, thank you. And second is I want to understand better on the H2 one-offs, because we saw some in Belgium, some in Germany. Are there any that can be extrapolated from H1? Are there any additional ones that what we could expect on H2?
Yeah. So for Belgium, we expect, let's say, the result to be a little bit more front-loaded precisely to the one-off that we had, and so we don't expect to have one-offs in the same magnitude in the second semester of the year. For Germany, one of the elements contributing to the one-offs is always linked to let's say, regulatory decisions. And the timing of those regulatory decisions is not easy to predict or to anticipate. So very difficult to answer your question for Germany, whether we can expect, let's say, a little bit more of one-offs at the end of the period than what we saw in the beginning of the period. So like I said, it will depend on a number of factors, the timing being not under our control.
Okay, understood. Thank you. That'll be all, myself.
Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe just for completeness, we also had Quirijn Mulder from ING, but unfortunately he could not dial in, but he shared his questions. The questions he had, but I think those have been tackled already, was also about the performance that we had in the Q1 or the half-year results compared to the full-year guidance, and so the questions on the one-off, and secondly also the question on the performance of NemoLink, but I think that was also clearly tackled in the presentation and answered as part of the question of Vivienne. So I don't think that we need to go much deeper on those questions like this.
Okay.
Okay.
Any pending questions from any of the analysts following the questions raised by Olivier, Juan, or Vivienne?
Maybe I have one more question, Nick. It's linked to inflation. With inflation, your projects that you execute, your investments will become more expensive. Do you take that into account for your investment guidance this year, or when will we start to see the impact from that inflation in your investments and eventually the RAP?
So for 2022, we don't expect the capex to be much impacted by the inflation, and the reason is that most of the contracts signed to deliver the capex in 2022, we already signed by the end of last year, so in 2021. At prices including some inflation, but the 2021 inflation and not really the 2022 inflation. So neither in Belgium nor in Germany, we expect to have, let's say, high impact of inflation on the 2022 capex program. The reason why we increased the guidance in Germany is really linked to the fact that we have anticipated some milestones on especially two projects. And so that's really the reason why there is an upward revision of the guidance.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I think if there are no further questions, Marleen, I think we can close the analyst call.
Indeed.
And thank everybody for its participation.
Indeed. Thank you, Yannick. We suggest to bring this presentation to a close, and luckily nobody fainted today in the studio during our presentation. Thank you, Yannick. Thank you, Chris and Catherine, for your contribution. A recording of the presentation, the slides and the script will be made available online later today. Thank you for joining us, and enjoy the summer.